go into our time together today. So I'm gonna get us started just by saying welcome to topic 2. We'll be looking at the standards of spending and saving plans today in our community of practice, looking at the financial education standards. Just really quickly want to go over the scope of the 3-part series that we've been working on. So quick review, we've been practicing and shifting the narrative and the context of our work, refreshing our understanding of the core content from the standards, exploring some ways that the corporate economic literacy, the first 3 topics as outlined in our standards exist, and building connections and collaborations between our IDA staff from across Oregon. Again, the intent of this space is to try to create a community of practice, a space in which we can come together and get grounded and have our anchors in what it is that we're called to do, and also a space for us to be brave and be in collaboration as practitioners as we're out here trying to skill and will up our staff to serve the clients that we have the pleasure of working with and walking beside. Just kind of want to overview what we did in the last session, topic 1, looking at the standards of the last session. Really quickly, the recap was we had the opportunity to do some examination of our core values, looking at our come-froms and naming and monitoring those core values. And then we did a lot of practicing as it related to the tool of reflection throughout that as individuals and as a collective. And I have a great quote that I think sums that up by Lisa Del Pitt that says, "We do not really see through our eyes or hear through our ears, but through our beliefs." And so that calls in the core belief work that we were doing, how it shows up and how we show up, and how it also shows up and how we examine some of the scope of the series that we're trying to do, the systems thinking that we're trying to approach, and the way that we're trying to lift up the folks that we serve. So that's the quick recap and review, and I will pass it off to Julie.
So today we're focusing on topic 2, and we are going to talk about budgets, but some people like to call them savings and spending plans. I personally like that language better. We want to emphasize that language is really important. It has an emotional impact. For instance, I know this isn't something that you hear too often, but back when I got started many years ago, you heard people use the term disposable income. And I just want for you guys to imagine the emotional impact that language has versus something like discretionary income. But people react emotionally sometimes to particular words. And so we want to try and refrain from using budget as much as we can because they associate it with limiting language. And obviously people don't like to be told what to do. So savings and spending plan is not only descriptive of what the end goal is, but it also frames it as a process in which the participants have a choice in how they allocate their money. And for today's session, we're going to do our best to use savings and spending plan, but there are going to be times where we're going to use the word budget interchangeably for the sake of clarity for this session.
Awesome. Thanks, Julie. And as always, in a community of practice that we're building, wanted to call in another tool. I think we had mentioned before, trying to periodically take a beat or slow down to make sure we're not slipping back into the ruts of our kind of predisposed paths as people and as practitioners, right? We're imperfect. So I wanted to introduce the tool of community agreements. This is new. I'm sure a lot of you have experienced this at your organizations, agencies, or in other spaces. You may move as allies or as advocates, but the community agreements are a tool to create spaces, most often for conversations about race and equity or equity and justice. We call them in here because at NP, in our equity and justice journey, we've really been leaning into these tools as it relates to policies, procedures, and practices over the last year, and want to call it into the space for us as we practice here and then also do this work with the folks that we work with. This work comes from Glenn Singleton, if you're familiar with him. It was founded kind of in education as a tool specific to race. The goal is to create a brave space not a safe space, because a safe space can perpetuate dominant culture norms. And so when we talk about narrative change, when we talk about trying to center and lift up BIPOC perspectives and experiences, it is a useful tool. And it also kind of counters just the dominant culture norm, right? Because if you don't unpack the norms or you don't set them a lot of times and you're talking about issues of justice, then the space oftentimes favors those who are versed very strongly in dominant white culture. So you center them to disrupt. That's the intent. And that's what we'll do in our space today as we engage as practitioners. So really quickly, the 4 that we're calling in, stay engaged. So engage in kind of the tension and don't indulge the drama. Speak your truth responsibly from your place as a practitioner, from your lived experience, and from your experience leading classes or in this space of getting tools to help others lead classes. A growth mindset, we're going to just apply that. This is a space to learn, and we're all here as learners in order to help other people. And last but not least, confidentiality. Take the lessons, leave the details. So those are the agreements we'll call into the space for just how we engage with each other in an effort to create a brave learning space. With that, we'll kind of move on to the next slide. So small group conversation leaders, as y'all saw, we put out a call to try to enroll folks to step into this space to support us as we support each other in the work that we do. And since we often are in a space of leading and facilitating, wanted to kind of do the same thing in this space. So as always, going to continue to invite folks, going to continue to try to build this into our practice. Today is going to look a little different in the instance that we didn't get as many volunteers as we needed or wanted. And so we're still going to call in an opportunity for us to stretch and step into our leadership and have folks step into that space today in practice. We will be in the space as well as hosts and guides in that space, but we wanted to set some guidelines for what this looks like. And so basically we're going to have 2 small group breakouts today around some guiding questions. If you are the small group conversation leader, you will be stepping into the space of just trying to facilitate the container of the space to these guidelines, which are pretty simple. Stuff we do every day, not a hard ask. You don't need to be trained or have any specific skills to do it, just the will and the want and the experience that most of us have. So being a guide rail is just keeping everyone on topic, calling in the questions, recognizing as always, silence can be a tool, but also to the best of your ability, try to find ways to get folks to engage, to participate, to share their experience. The role isn't to fill space, but to bring forth other people's ideas and further the ideas and contributions of what we're doing as a collective community. Make sure all the questions are getting answered to the best of your ability, maybe provide some clarifying questions, or you could send those to us as the host if there's questions that are stumpers or just are hard to get through, and we can work through those collectively. Make sure there's a person in the group that can share out when we come back. So at least one share out, try to collect that, get a volunteer to do that. And as always, a good tool is to try to phrase questions in different ways to help create understanding to the best of your ability, to the best of others. Let's use each other, and these guidelines will help us in our conversations. So we'll be doing that today. We'll be practicing a little, and as always, we'll continue to invite and ask folks for the rest of the series to lean into these spaces and stretch so that we can learn and grow together in our work. All right. And then I think we're on to the next slide, I believe. All right. So now that we laid down those guide rails, we're going to break into some small groups. And in the small groups, we are going to approach these 2 guiding questions. One of the things we're going to do specifically in this group is try to utilize a Jamboard. I myself am not very versed to the Jamboard, so this will be a first time for me to practice and lean into that. And I'm sure I will mess up, but hopefully there's others who can help guide me through that. But we're going to break into some small groups. We're going to enroll folks into that, someone leading that space based on those expectations. And we're going to use the Jamboard to put some responses to these questions. So yeah, we posted the questions, I believe, in the chat. We also have the Jamboard link in the chat as well, that you'll be able to access to put your Post-its on the questions. You can navigate the questions. There's a, oh, there it is. Actually, Luke, you want to walk us through a real quick tutorial? I'm probably not the best tutorial because
for sure. Yeah, so if you haven't used the Jamboard, it is it's like a digital sticky note wall, I guess. So again, we know that like to have somebody in the group volunteer to be kind of a conversation leader would be really helpful. Anybody can use the Jamboard. So if you click on that link, anybody can add sticky notes. Whether or not you share them in your group, you can just put them up there. So the way it works is on the left side, there's some tools to navigate what you can do, but the main one is that you click this, the fourth one down is labeled a sticky note. And you can say, so I'll just put in, this is my note, right? So then it shows up and then somebody else already added something, a way to see where your money is going. So we're gonna see all the groups are gonna put things on this sticky note, but in your group, you can also discuss. We want to encourage that discussion and conversation. You can also then go to the next page. So there are 2 pages, and here at the top is how you navigate the page to go from one to the other. So we're gonna give you 10 minutes to go into breakout rooms, have somebody volunteer as the conversation leader, figure out who, if anybody, needs to take the role of putting the sticky notes on the board. That'll get us kind of that combined interaction on this board between the groups. And then we'll have some time to report out on these 2 questions for people. So we've introduced a couple things here. Any questions before we break out? You're going to be in groups of 5 to 6 people, and it'll be 10 minutes long. Any questions before I send you? Going once, going twice. All right, see you back in 10 minutes. All right, welcome back. We're going to spend a little time sharing out. If you have some takeaways, you can look at the board. I've been looking at the board. I think it's there. I see some themes coming up. You can move things around if you see particular alignment. Don't too many people go moving things around though, or you start, moving the same sticky note back and forth. But does anybody have anything they want to share out on the first one, which is just what is a budget? And again, we used budget because we want to kind of call to that the word that's most commonly thrown around, I think, as to like when you say budget or a participant says budget, what is that? How would you define that? And so open it up for anybody to share what your group might have come to as some conclusions.
So my name's Adriana, and in our group, we really talked about, budgeting and tracking funds as a way to plan or create a guideline every month. Something that's not like set in stone, but also a way to figure out, how available your funds are just to put towards goals and savings. That was a big part of discussion, but really just a way to plan and kind of see where your money's going, and save towards goals.
Great, thank you. Anybody else?
In our group, we talked about budgets being scary at times. I know that when I'm introducing personal budget to clients that we're supporting, they're always give this like jerk reaction. And one way that I kind of connect with them is I say like, yeah, I'm afraid of a budget as well. but I think that it's helpful information for us to see your spending patterns and also help you find ways to save for your IDA.
Thank you. And just to follow up, is the scary referring to like letting somebody in on what it looks like, or is it just kind of like avoidance? Is it about sharing it with somebody?
I think it's both. Yes, this is a podcast about life admin, and that there's different types of people who approach the admin of life different ways, and avoidance is one. So not doing a personal budget is one way to avoid dealing with the bills and the things that are involved with life, pretty much.
Thanks, Denise. Yeah, there's accountability tool was put on here.
Mm-hmm.
What about on why use a budget? They kind of overlap, but if a budget has these particular purposes, why use a budget? So accountability, I think, goes to that. What else did people come up with on that second slide?
I think tracking. So you have your budget that you make at the beginning of the month. This is what I'm going to spend my money on, right? And then at the end, you kind of redo it and see what you actually spent your money on. And it allows you to track and see, oh, I'm spending a ton of money on food where I thought I was only spending like 150, I'm spending $400. And I've literally seen that helping people do their budgets. And another thing that came up in ours was talking about the word budget, and they linked it to like diet. Like diets are negative. They're usually like temporary and you don't keep going on them, and using the word spending plan instead. And it is more like lifestyle change, which is kind of more final. You're doing a whole new lifestyle, and so it's not as negative. So
great. We'll get one more. Adriana, you have your hand up.
Yeah, we had, kind of similar to, Sammy, in that, you can kind of, push money around if you're spending too much in one spot, or if you have a lot left over. And we also just talked about, it being a great way to like prepare for expected and unexpected expenses. Because you can kind of look at, where you have an excess of money or something that maybe you can miss out on for the month. And I do a lot of with my clients, like playing with scenarios. You have a $300 emergency this month. Where do you take the money from? So we discussed that a little bit. And then if you have an easy month, then everything can go into like the savings or groceries and where it's supposed to. So.
Thank you. Joanne, did you want to share before we move on?
Thank you, Luke. I added a sticky note in here about tracking expenses in real time and the value of when you're creating your spending plan and tracking those expenses in real time, it starts to create barriers along the way. So, oftentimes folks might say, I use my card for everything, so I just look at my checking account. But when you're looking at your checking account, it only tells you the amount that you spent and where, not what. And so the value of every few days or maybe weekly, looking at those receipts, looking back and saying, how much have I actually spent in these areas? And then that in itself starts to create a barrier, right? You might get to week 2 and say, oh my gosh, I've already spent $125 dining out. Let's see if I can make some changes before the end of the month. So it starts to create some change immediately. And then the other thing that my group mentioned, which is great, is how the way that you spend your money is a reflection of your values. And so by tracking your expenses, you're able to create a line item for the thing that you value. So maybe it's tithing, maybe it's buying games every month on your phone, maybe it's getting your nails done or tackle fish lure, whatever it is. Everybody has something, but knowing that you don't have to eliminate it, you have to redirect your money and then cap it somewhere. So recognizing the anatomy of a spending plan, that there's going to be fixed expenses, variable expenses, and those periodic expenses.
Thank you. You're getting ahead of us. We'll get to some of those points later too. Sabrina, you also have your hand up. I want to make sure we get to anybody. Go ahead.
Oh, thanks. When we were talking about language, I was thinking that even as we talk about this, and it's not wrong, we're talking about how budgets keep us in line, help us track things. One slight change to that is that I was saying in our group that the exercise of reviewing your budget makes you more likely to catch bank errors or something wrong with your paycheck, all of those things. So that slight change in thinking that it's not to keep yourself in line, and if you overspend, you're going to mess up for the month. It's more that you're on top of your own situation, so you are better prepared to interact with all of these institutions that might make a mistake. Thanks.
Yeah, excellent point. Thank you for sharing that. All right, there will be more discussion later. Our next breakout group will be 20 minutes long, so you'll have more time to talk in breakouts. We did get some feedback from last session that the small group breakouts are a rich time for people, so we're going to make sure and come back to that. But I'm going to move us on to, I believe Randy is next, just to look us back at core values real quick.
Yeah. Well, thanks, everybody. For sharing in that space. I had the benefit in my group of thinking about that in the space of a visual cue on a highway, right? The budget is a visual cue on a highway, but it's not necessarily the destination. So I appreciated my group and being able to expand on a come from or a thinking around that. So really quickly, I know we kind of did a little of this when I was talking earlier, but before we move on to topic 2, just kind of wanted to come back and ground ourselves in one of the bigger takeaways from session 1. And then again, as a collective community and as practitioners, really encouraging and reminding us to implement, incorporate through the tool of reflection or some type of introspection, spaces and opportunities for folks to exercise with their core values and how those come froms may show up and how things are approached. And so we got to do a lot of that in session 1. We were focusing on identifying them, how that impacts our lives. We were also looking at how to allocate a fair amount of time to this in our sessions. So again, that being a call in for us when we think about how we're doing the work and showing up to the work. We also were thinking about how to continue to find resources and ways as a community to expand our toolkits. And so one of the things we got in feedback and one of the things we wanted to offer was introducing basically a virtual toolkit that we could all access through a Google Doc. So Luke, if you're able to, could you link that in the chat for everybody? And our thought process was we want to welcome everybody to post links here to resources that can live here in these sessions and beyond these sessions around themes and topics so that we're able to access them as a learning community. And it's a way for us to keep things fresh, to add to topics, to find different resources, different ways to engage adult learners, but also center the experience of BIPOC folks as it relates to some of these things that may be rigid in concept framing or unpacking, or at least what we've been kind of talking about, trying to focus more on being harder on systems and softer on people, and how we do that as practitioners and facilitating these trainings.
So today we're going to weave some behavioral economics, some brain science and financial education, as well as economic literacy together. And we're going to start by watching a couple of videos. And the first is on System 1 and System 2 thinking.
Professor Daniel Kahneman, who is best known as the only psychologist to win a Nobel Prize, in economics actually, has spent decades investigating people's thought processes. His insights into the way our minds work spring from the mistakes that we make. Those mistakes, he argues, are not random. They are systematic errors that we all make all the time without realizing it. Professor Kahneman realized that we actually have 2 systems of thinking, one automatic, called System 1, and one effortful, System 2. In his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, Professor Kahneman invites the reader to think of the 2 systems as agents within the mind, with their individual personalities, abilities, and limitations. And because the use of such language is considered a sin in academic circles, Kahneman makes the important note that System 1 and System 2 are fictional characters. They are more like nicknames of the complex processes within our brains. Why call them System 1 and System 2 rather than the more descriptive automatic system and effortful system? The reason Kahneman argues is simple. Automatic system takes longer to say than System 1 and therefore takes more space in your working memory, thus reducing your ability to think. We decided to take this idea one step further, depicting the two systems with two well-known characters from TV, Hal from Malcolm in the Middle, starring as System 1, and Dr. House, starring as System 2. Keep in mind that those TV characters are definitely not a perfect representation of System 1 and System 2 thinking, but they might help you understand the abstract nature of the concept. With that out of the way, let's take a closer look at the two characters inside the brain. System 1 is intuitive, fast and automatic. It relies on mental shortcuts and quickly proposes intuitive answers to problems as they arise. This fast way of thinking is actually responsible for most of the things that you say, do, think and believe. And yet you have no idea that this is happening. This system is your autopilot and it has a mind of its own. That's why most people identify it as the stranger within. At its core, System 1 works through the process of associative memory. It continuously finds connections between words, images, feelings, actions, ideas and memories in order to build a coherent interpretation of life as we experience it. Professor Kahneman defines it as the storyteller. It tells the best stories it can from the available pieces of information, even when the information is sparse or unreliable. When we measure how good a story is or how confident we are in its accuracy, we actually do not evaluate the reliability of the evidence and its quality, but the coherence of the story. One of the defining characteristics of System 1 thinking is the phenomenon that Kahneman describes as what you see is all there is, or in other words, System 1 pays no attention to what it does not know. It only works with ideas that have been primed and activated in the system. As Kahneman points out, System 1 is our mental system for jumping to conclusions. So, that's System 1 in a nutshell. As we have mentioned, there is another way thoughts come to mind, and this is definitely not the intuitive way. System 2 is the deliberate, logical part of your mind. It is an expert at solving problems, but it is slow, requires a lot of energy, and is extremely lazy. A very important aspect of System 2 thinking is that it is effortful, and what psychologists mean by effortful? Well, basically it's something you cannot do while making a left turn into traffic. You cannot do it, and you shouldn't try it. And the reason is, there is limited capacity to exert effort. The more tasks System 2 takes on, the more energy it requires. As a result, System 2 attempts to preserve its energy by doing as little work as possible, and when feeling cognitive pressure, it assigns the work to System 1. In short, System 2 is powerful, but lazy. Kahneman's fundamental proposition is that we identify with System 2. We believe that we are the conscious, reasoning self that has beliefs, makes choices and decides what to think about and what to do. But actually most of the time, the one that is really in charge is System 1. Usually System 1 runs automatically and System 2 is in a comfortable, low-effort mode in the background. The problem comes when we allow our fast, intuitive system to make decisions that we really should pass over to our slow, logical one. This is where all the mistakes in our thinking emerge.
So both systems are critical to our daily functioning. But like the narrator said, we over-identify with System 2 and think that most of our decision making comes from that, whereas 95% of our decisions come from System 1 and only 5% come from System 2. Imagine having to think about every single step of getting dressed every morning. Our lives would be a lot slower, but I'm sure you can also think of a time when you feel like you're broken your brain from the mental strain of learning something new. I know, like, this is always funny. Like, I always make this comment whenever I'm in the car with someone and they're driving to somewhere unfamiliar and it's dark, and we're like going really slow. And one of the first things they do is reach over and turn down the music. And that's kind of the idea, is that we're putting mental strain on our brains by using System 2. And so we have to like kind of tune out all the other things that are distracting us. So on to the next slide.
Yeah, next we're gonna watch another video. This one is about synaptic pruning.
You look at a cup of coffee. You see a cup of coffee. But what if when you looked at a cup of coffee, your eyes sent signals to the auditory center of your brain? Not only would you see the coffee, you'd start hearing things too. How distracting.
Now imagine how confusing an entire city would be with all of this overlapping sensory information. Well, this might actually happen if we didn't have synaptic pruning.
What is synaptic pruning?
Inside your brain, there are interconnected groups of neurons called neural networks. The neurons communicate through synapses. Let's look under a microscope. Scientists are able to isolate brain cells in a dish and observe them over time moving and communicating with one another. The synapse is where this communication happens. When you are a baby, you have a lot of these synapses. In fact, you have too many. As you develop into adulthood, your brain has to prune away the weaker synapses in order to function efficiently. This is what we call synaptic pruning.
Now, let's imagine your brain as a densely populated city with billions of buildings, each one connected to every other with its own separate road. This city looks like your brain when you were a baby. Too many connections! In fact, this is what scientists call hyperconnectivity, and it is one chaotic place. This city needs some pruning.
But how do we know which synapses to get rid of and which to keep?
Imagine you're driving to school, trying to navigate these tiny separate roads. It would be difficult at first, but eventually you'd find the fastest route and take that path each day. Your friends see how fast you're getting to school and decide to follow you. Soon, all the kids in the neighborhood are taking the same road and there is too much traffic. The city needs to widen and strengthen this road to move all the traffic along efficiently.
The brain does the same thing with synapses between neurons that are sending lots of messages back and forth. The more the pathway is used, the stronger the connection.
And what happens to all those tiny streets you no longer use to get to school? We don't need them anymore, so let's remove that asphalt. This is when synaptic pruning comes into play. Your brain adapts, removing the connections it isn't using anymore.
As the cells in your eyes send more and more messages to the visual processing center of your brain, those connections are strengthened. Meanwhile, the connections from your eyes to the auditory center of the brain are pruned away, so information from your eyes is processed only visually.
A big part of efficient synaptic pruning is keeping the proper balance. If not enough pruning occurs, the brain stays hyperconnected, as it was when you were a baby. This hyperconnectivity has been observed in some cases of autism, which could be related to the feeling of being overwhelmed when processing chaotic environments.
On the other hand, with too much pruning, communication within and between neural networks is disrupted. This results in impaired cognitive function, such as memory loss typically observed in Alzheimer's disease.
In a city with too much pruning, roadblocks pop up on your route to school, causing you to be late or making it impossible to get there. As it happens in the brain, this loss of synapses makes it hard to access memories and blocks certain paths of communication.
While the largest period of synaptic pruning is early in life, this process continues throughout adulthood. So keep learning and happy pruning.
All right, so in brief, what we want to talk about is practice makes perfect. So athletes train their bodies to respond to particular visual and auditory stimuli, production line workers as well. In the beginning, learning these things were effortful System 2 activities. At some point, a coach or supervisor may have needed to help them unlearn something they were doing in error. They had to break down the old neural connections and build new ones. Eventually, System 2 activities turned into automatic System 1 activities. So our question for today, it's going to be a mini reflection. It's going to take 2 minutes. I'm going to play some music and invite you to put an answer in the chat if you want. We're not going to share out because we're going to keep us moving here. But if repetition helps build new neural pathways, what are some System 2 activities that we can practice regularly to improve our personal finances? So a couple minutes to think on this, and then we will have a break in a couple minutes after this. So if you need a break, try and hold on for a couple more minutes, and then we'll wrap up for a quick break and we'll keep going. But 2 minutes to answer this question. You can write it, add it in the chat, think about it, whatever works for you.
I'm gonna play some dope ass shit. Repeat after
All right, lots of good things coming in on the chat. So I'll pass it over to Julie to keep us moving.
These are some really great answers. Thank you all for taking the time to put those in. So what we want to focus on today is the critical step of expense tracking. Some of you guys have already mentioned expense tracking as a step that you have your participants take in the budgeting process. It's very much an important part before you're able to develop a realistic savings and spending plan. If you'll go ahead and just put in the chat box how long you guys typically have your participants track their expenses. And I'm not talking about reviewing your bank statements or checking your transactions on your phone on a daily basis, but I'm talking about actively recording your purchases in specified categories in real time. Like Joanne was talking about, we're going to hit a lot of the same points. So 1 month, every month, 1 to 2 months. Yep. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So for, so we're really looking for granular data. So if I go to Target and buy laundry detergent, clothes, books, I make 3 different entries into my expense tracker as soon as I possibly can. If I have a habit of buying midday snacks at the corner store, that gets recorded separately than my general groceries budget because I'm looking for data that I can use in terms of what expenses need to be cut eventually. So tracking expenses is a system 2 activity when you're doing it actively as they're happening. Some people, like Joanne said, curtail their spending during their tracking period because they won't become more aware of the spending, and then they decide not to buy things. And some people even decide, I don't want to actually record this purchase, so I'm just not going to buy it. And another person earlier had talked about, dieting as a word that people don't like because it's restrictive, but that this is kind of like a lifestyle thing. Interestingly, there have been studies that have shown that the most effective way to lose weight and keep it off is to track your food intake. Expense tracking can work the same way for people who are trying to rein in their spending. So a few years ago, I convinced my spouse to commit to a year of active expense tracking. We downloaded an app called Blue Coins, and we figured out how to make entries into one account from 2 smartphones. And we decided on the categories. We had regular conversations about what was working and what wasn't. And at the end of the year, we downloaded and analyzed the data. With this information, we created a plan that worked for us. I don't actively track anymore, but I do keep all my receipts and total the categories each month, and just to see how we did. But the process of tracking helped me create a mental anchor for how much things cost and what we consider to be a reasonable expense in each category. So these are all things that, build those neural pathways. So we take those autopilot things that we do and we convert them into effortful, mindful things. And hopefully those activities rein in the spending if that's what's necessary. The flip side of the making better financial decisions narrative is that we have participants that know exactly where every penny goes because they're stretching every last cent they make so that they can make ends meet. So their neural pathways for knowing where they spend their money has been strengthened over time. And my experience, these participants, if they're willing, are excellent resources in identifying cost-saving measures for their fellow participants. But it is still very beneficial for these participants to track their expenses as a way to verify their data. So in the chat box, if you'll put any methods or tools you introduce to your participants for the purpose of expense tracking, are there smartphone expense tracking apps you especially like? You can share them in the Google document. Luke, will you put that link again in the chat box so people can access it? Or you can just type in resources that you like into the chat box. All right. So we're going to take a break and reconvene in, well, let's say, how about 11:05? My clock says 10:58 right now. And we're going to leave you with this quote. We're going to come back to take a look at the quote, give it a little thought, and then we'll come back and have a little conversation about it. See you soon.
All right, welcome back, welcome back. Give folks some time to join us back in the space. Call your attention to this slide and this quote. I'll read it a couple of times, but right here you got Pacific Northwest, Summer Cool, Joe Cool on the Costco run with the shades on, stunning on them, telling us, don't tell me what you value, show me your budget and I'll tell you what you value. So for those of us coming back to the space, this is the visual you had. This is the quote you had. Don't tell me what you value. Show me your budget and I'll tell you what you value. Brought to us by Pacific Northwest, Summer Costco Sunday Run, Cool President Joe. So as I call you into this space, I want you to share in the chat box, what assumptions does this statement make? So what assumptions does this statement make? Feel free to put those in the chat. I see some good things coming. I see some good things coming. Keep putting them in the chat. Don't tell me what you value. Show me your budget and I'll tell you what you value. What assumptions does this statement make? Tap my co-host. Do we want to pull some in as a share or hit a transition point? Well, I'll hit a transition point for us, and I think folks can reference these in there because there's some good ones. But what I like and the theme that I see coming up in the chat that I appreciate and I would call in as we transition is that there's an assumption that is not applying the lens of structural oppression. And I think there's a plethora of examples of what that looks like and how it shows up based on the assumptions and come-froms of this particular statement. So continue to share those, definitely reference those. And with that, I will pass the proverbial mic over to Julie to take us to the next.
These are some great insights about these assumptions. And what we wanted to do was to introduce some framing questions that you can introduce to your participants. At the end of a tracking period, you can have your participants analyze their discretionary expenses through the lens of their values. And I say discretionary expenses because you're right. There are certain expenses you can't control, regardless of how you feel about their value. You know, you can't control the cost of the heat that comes into your house, except for maybe using a little less of it, but you have to use it. And, you know, things like gasoline prices are out of your control as well. But some of the questions that we want to throw out there would be like, how are these purchases aligned with my values? Looking at all the expenses that I've tracked in this set period of time, which one of my values showed up most in my purchases? Remember, these are discretionary purchases. Which the least, which not at all. Which of these purchases did I make on autopilot? Maybe you guys have, maybe people have reoccurring purchases that they forgot about. Maybe they're not using those services at all. Maybe they're just buying things out of habit. Where were most of my purchases made and why? And this kind of throws us back to that first session of talking about, you know, like when we make purchases at places that don't necessarily align with our values, we're also making a choice and a statement about, you know, how we spend our money and what we value. And so remembering that there is an impact of where you spend your money. A bit large corporation that's not based where you live versus small locally owned businesses. Those are also values-based decisions. Which of these purchases are due to being under-resourced? Like you guys pointed out, I may value environmental conversation, but I don't have enough cash on hand to buy a high quality, durable goods that will last for a long time. This is really common. What choices would I have made differently that would have brought my actions closer to alignment with my values had money not been an issue? What do my habits reveal about my values, and are these fixed or changeable? Our choices aren't neutral, and so examining expense tracking through the lens of values can be revealing. I think it's always important to remind ourselves and our participants that we trade our time, which is our most precious and non-renewable resource, for money. And then we turn around and we spend that money on things and experiences. So shouldn't we make those purchases as deliberate and meaningful as possible? So, you know, these questions can be like posed in a group setting, or you can, you know, have them printed on a handout and have them, you know, reflect on them and write them down if they process their, you know, if they don't like being put on the spot, then, and they want to take some time to like think about this. But for a moment, I'd like you guys to think about a question that you would have your participants ask themselves to aid in good financial decision making in the moment when they're about to make a purchase. I like to think about these questions as like wedges. There's a concept called wedge of consciousness, and the question is just kind of the wedge that triggers you to just pause or slow down, make more mindful decisions. Is this purchase alignment with my goals? Nice. I love that, Sabrina. Is this worth the effort and time I'm trading for it? That's awesome. The associated costs, the things that we don't always think through. Great. All right, we're going to zoom out a little bit now and focus on the ways that budgets affect other parts of our lives. So whether it's federal, state, local, organizational, where we allocate our resources is an expression of our values. And so how this is different than your own personal savings and spending plan is that there are less constraints, right? We have our elected officials always telling us that, you know, oh, there's only so much in like of a pot of money, but somehow they seem to be able to dig deep for the things that seem to matter with them. So this is a chart of President Biden's proposed discretionary federal budget for 2022. Again, discretionary federal budget, there's a larger pot of money. This is probably about a quarter of the pot, but the rest of it, we have no choice in spending. So that's Social Security, Medicare, all those funds. So this is the portion of the budget that our legislators actually have a choice in where they allocate. So based on how our public resources are allocated, what do you think our national values are? Looking at this pie chart.
We value war, whatever the premise for it. We value war in this nation.
Okay. We value control. Can you say more about that?
Me?
Oh, I was looking at Cunali's. We value control. Weapons, power, and control. War, imperialism, white supremacy, power and suppression. Okay. All right. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to break into war and power. We're valuing people. Yeah, I mean, look at that. Just look at that pie chart. That's a large portion of our discretionary spending. So we're going to break you all out into small groups again, and we're going to spend some time discussing the following 3 questions. Luke, can you? Okay. So, you know, what we're trying to do here is really, this is the economic justice or literacy portion of it, is to pull in a concept that seems really far away for most people, possibly even ourselves, which is governmental budgeting process. It's something that affects all of our everyday lives, but it's also something that we don't tend to pay a lot of attention to. And so what we want to do is make those connections about the budgeting process and how our navigating a budgeting process within a family household is a microcosm of the larger budgeting system within our governments. Okay, and so we have these 3 questions. What are the budgeting challenges that arise when there are multiple people with various values and priorities? In which ways are the decision-making processes similar or different in developing a household savings and spending plan versus a government budget? And who is over or underrepresented in a family or household, and who is over or underrepresented in government? So we're going to give a little bit more time to have these conversations in your groups, and ask if you haven't had a chance in the last session to volunteer as a group discussion leader, please step up and help us out. So we're going to spend about 15-20 minutes, depending. I think we're going to spend 20 minutes. No, 15 minutes. I'm looking at the clock and seeing that we probably can only spend 15 minutes today. Okay. All right. We'll see you back in 15 minutes.
Yeah, if you need to find the questions, again, refer to the chat. You should still be able to see the chat. So let me set it up here and we'll send you out.
Hello, good morning.
Is that the painted desert behind you? Not you, the other lady.
Oh, me?
Yes.
It's the Painted Hills here in Oregon.
Oh, oh, I need to get down to Southern Oregon.
Yeah, it's
I'm
really
from
nice.
Texas. Yeah, I'm from
Oh,
Texas. Yeah, so yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
All right, well, welcome back. I don't know about y'all. I know we were having a good conversation, some healthy tension and navigation of those questions. And yeah, now we get to bring it back to a larger group. And I want to invite folks to maybe share out and then we can debrief in the larger space around some of the things that came up specific to those questions. Of budgeting challenges when there's multiple people and perspectives and priorities in place, and the distinctions between an individual or household spending plan and government budget, and then who's over and underrepresented in that kind of dichotomy or examples. So anybody want to share some thoughts or things that came up?
Well, we had some good discussions. What I'd like to say is that, usually like parents are going to be making those major decisions about like, where the expenses go for like housing, food, and then what's left over. Maybe the kids nowadays will have more than, let's say, when I was growing up or so. But the point I was also trying to talk about is, the parents made a decision to buy maybe a more expensive car or home, and it's put the family maybe in a more precarious position than if they maybe could have discussed it and said, we are spending X number of dollars and now we're in a difficult position thanks to you pushing to get that more expensive car that might be costing us more in repairs. And so that could have been like vacation time or something. So that was one of the discussions.
Nice. Appreciate that.
For our group, can I go ahead?
Yeah, you
Okay,
good.
for our group, I think what we narrowed down is that some of the challenges could be cultural understanding and also lack of financial literacy. For example, we shared that sometimes in other cultures, a lot of the males kind of dominate the decisions in the household. As for women, we would maybe have different decisions in what we would budget or finance, but then in culture specific environments, males end up making decisions, or even people just not understanding credit or how credit may work, or just kind of scared to really disclose budget, or used to disclose budget. Sorry, I'm getting nervous.
Oh, you're okay.
Disclose budget or their actual finances just due to household size or how many jobs they may be working, and just actually being comfortable with someone. Like they may not always be comfortable disclosing it unless you're really making it comfortable for them, especially communities that are wary about immigration status.
Thank you. Those are important things to bring up, cultural context. I know something we talked about was microcosms, right? Everything's a microcosm. And so I think patriarchy and racism and all these things are true in this country, and they reflect and refract, whether it's the government or a household. How, I think, looks a lot of ways. I know we were rumbling a little bit with what that could look like and how maybe they're different or not different. But I do think when you think about some of that stuff and pull it in, it gets very layered, very nuanced, very complicated. Are there any others who want to share and add in the space with the share? Going once, going twice. All right, well, as always, if something comes up for you, utilize the Google resource we have as a space to share ideas, inputs, and ways to negotiate and further discuss these things, and ways to bring this stuff to the work we do and the folks that we serve. Really quickly, just kind of to close this portion out, government budgeting processes are complicated and a crane, but they impact virtually every part of our lives and the quality of our kids' education, public safety, how well our roads are maintained, the safety of our food, and so much more. Again, microcosms of those things in which we talk about, yet most of us feel disconnected to these decision-making processes. I want to say that again, disconnected to the decision-making processes. And the point isn't to explain in detail how it works, but to connect them to the idea that budgeting on an institutional level has similar challenges when there are competing values and priorities involved. So to get your needs considered in either situation, you need to make your voice heard. How we go about that, I don't know. But what I shared with my group, which I really appreciated in an earlier segment of what we did, is someone was talking about their values. And they were talking about a value that was a way of being, that was a process that would allow a family weekly to check in around the value of how money is spent in a household. And it seems like that process creates voice and choice and engagement for those stakeholders involved in that particular situation. And that caught my attention. So again, need to make or find ways to have voices heard. And what can the average person do to provide input in an institutional budgeting process is the question I want to leave us on to think about and to pull into other spaces as we think about this work.
All right, I'm going to take it next. So as you've noticed, we're kind of like pulling back and forth between the household level. We want to try and bring the more macro level in to the discussions. I'm going to bring it kind of back down to the small level. So you all can see this here. We're going to go to a tweet here. So what she's saying here, I think, is a response to the message of the well-worn path we talked about last session, where the problem is bad spending decisions and the solution is budgeting. As Julie said, managing income and expenses is what people who live in poverty have to do on a daily basis. If we say that budgeting is the main solution, I'm afraid we have oversimplified the problem. So I would say budgeting is not a solution because no one can budget their way out of poverty. But what do we say the role of budgeting is? As an initiative, we have these standards. So I think it's best explained in the outcomes here on the right. So what can spending and savings plans do? They can help somebody analyze a financial situation and progress toward meeting savings goals of a household. This was, talked about early on from you all when you put up the sticky notes. They can help somebody work through how to plan for changes in expenses or income or benefits. They can help somebody manage the timing of income and expenses, and they can help set a short-term plan, among other things. So certainly both expense tracking, what we've talked about, and spending and savings plans can be tools for coaching conversations that you all might have with clients about the current financial realities and the future goals. Traditional approaches to budgeting, I think, assume a few things: consistent income, sufficient income, predictable expenses, to name a few. For example, someone might need a different tool if they work a seasonal job, a temporary job, rely on small business income, are a student, work a gig economy job with unpredictable income. So we just want to say that one size doesn't fit all, right? It's not one tool can solve multiple problems that somebody might be identifying. So when you all answered the why budget question, we connected to a lot of reasons why we think budgeting is a helpful tool. I think our job is to help the participants first identify the problem they're trying to solve. And then we introduce the tools that might help them solve that problem. Again, so budgeting isn't the answer. It's a tool if the problem that they are trying to solve can be, benefited from working through a budget or tracking expenses. So what I would say is slow down, don't jump to conclusions, listen to what the person is saying, to what they're identifying as the problem that they're trying to solve. You might offer tools, but think about what tool you're offering. If somebody needs a hammer, you can't offer a screwdriver for it to be helpful. So we want to kind of think about the different tools that are helpful for different situations. And kind of to that, we want to introduce one tool that is mentioned in the standards. That's a particular budgeting tool that is from the CFPB. They put out the template for this. And so we pulled a video from Coach Troy, whoever that is gonna give us a quick demo on cash flow budgets, which is a particular, it has a particular role in managing the timing of expenses and income. So if you think about one problem that's identified, if it's timing of income and expenses, there's enough income, but it's not lining up right. This is a tool to say, okay, let's look at how these are landing. So we're gonna play this video, and then this is, we're gonna wrap up after this video and then send you on your way. So we'll get this going. It's a couple, about 7 or 8 minutes that we'll watch.
Hi, this is Coach Troy from Metro Lutheran Ministry, here once again to talk to you about your money. Only this time we're going to try something new. I want to show you a tool that we use sometimes to help people figure out the concept of cash flow. And that's when somebody may have enough money to get through the month, but because of the way the bills hit and the income comes in, they sometimes experience trouble during certain days or months or certain weeks in a month. So I want to flip this over here using a new tool today. I'm going to disappear here into the corner, and I want you to pay attention to this document. Now, this is a monthly budget. It's going to show what happens every week, as you can see, as we're pointing out here, with any income that comes in from whatever sources. And I want to use some data here that's from an actual client. So I want to show you what can sometimes happen. Now, I have a client that gets paid on the first week and the third week of every month. And when they get paid $1,150, but they get that twice a month. So we're going to put that in here, and it's going to show me $1,150. Now, when you see the numbers move at the top, that's showing you what they brought in. So if all this person did was receive their $1,150 twice a month, they'd have $2,300 at the end of the month. But they don't, do they? They have to go in and take care of some business. So now we're going to drop in their bills. And just so you can see this concept as clearly as possible, I want to throw all their bills in to the first of the month. So at the first of the month, all their bills are showing up, and now they need to pay for things like their cell phone. There's a child involved, there's 2 phones involved. The plan they have is $105 a month. As soon as I put that in there, now, they did have $1,150 minus their $105. This first week, they're down to $1,045, but they're not done with their payments yet. So now they've got their debt payments. They had a car payment, which was $230 that was due every month. They would go out to eat once in a while, and they didn't go out somewhere fancy, but they went out and probably in their minds, it was going to cost them about $75 a month that they were spending to eat out. As you see, as we're taking this money out on there, it is dropping down how much money they have altogether. They don't have any education or childcare expenses. The child's old enough to take care of themselves. They really entertain themselves at home, playing cards and stuff on the internet that's part of their utilities. Now, for groceries, they were spending about, as they were bringing this in here, I got to find it here, groceries was about $200 a month. All their healthcare expenses, everybody's in good health, taken care of through insurance at work. They don't give money to anything. They do have, however, housing and utility bills. Now, housing and utility bills, if we added that all up, they had $700 a month rent and then about $300 in utilities. So that was about $1,000. Now, you can see what's going to happen if I take this $1,000 out. Now they're in the hole by $460. Now, by the end of the month, they're okay. But where they're at right now, they're in trouble. But we're not even done yet. They do have a dog. That dog was about $45 a month because of the food that they bought. And they were trying to put in $50 a month into a savings account. And their transportation between gasoline for the car and insurance for the car was about, what is that, $209 altogether? So we can see, if we just look at what they have at the beginning of the month, they're in trouble until they get over here to that next paycheck. And so a cash flow budget asks you to take a look at this and then say, if you're someone who is in this situation, how can I move money around? And people say, well, the bills are where they are. The nice thing is you can call those people. So what I recommended to this client was, let's call the place that had the car loan and let's move that car loan. I just asked the people, hey, can I move that car loan from the first of the month? And can I move that over and put that $230 on the third week of the month? Now, when they do that, she's getting closer. See, she still has the same amount of money at the end of the month, right? But her amount that she's behind these first 2 weeks is going down substantially. Same thing, she can take a look at and say, okay, well, eating out, you're not spending that $75 all at one time. You're not spending that all in 1 week. Really, that first week, maybe the two of you go out and you spend $20, and you spend $20 the week after that, and $20 the week after that, and $20 the week after that. We even gave them an extra $5 there to go out and eat with for the month, right? But again, this number here went down a little more. I'm getting closer to the amount of money that they actually had available. Well, the same thing can happen here. Groceries and other supplies. She's not spending that $200 all at once. If there's 4 weeks in the month, she's going to spend that $50 at a week. So we're going to do that. $50 every week is going to go into groceries. All right, now I'm only $329 behind. Well, most places where you will rent from, that date's pretty much set in stone. And it wasn't her case. She couldn't move the date of her rent, but there's $300 other that were sitting over here. So guess what? We made a call to her utility companies, and Evergy and Spire, where she was with, they said, absolutely, you can move that. So this number went from being 1,000, it went down to just her rent. Her rent was still due on the first of the month, but her utilities became due in the middle of the month. So we moved that also to the third week, and that was a $300 move there. Now look, she's almost there at $29 short for that first week. Well,
all right, I think you get the point. You all work in this field. So just wanted to bring forward a tool from the content in the standards to think about different approaches that you might be offering or working with somebody through based on what problem they're identifying that they have. So I believe we are over to Randy next.
Yeah, thanks, Luke. I appreciate Coach Troy. I don't know where Coach Troy is or what he's doing, but his tutorial on cash flow, money in, money out, I appreciate it. And I don't know about y'all, but he was giving me like heavy Bob Ross vibes. So I appreciate Coach Troy. And with that, just want to, as always, ask us to share with each other any tools around tracking expenses or building spending and savings plan in the document that we created for the community collective so that we all can tap into these resources and advance and drive our work and our practice. We'd also like to encourage everybody to add digital tools to this space that you may use yourself or you use with clients that you find useful as far as strategies and tools as it relates to spending and saving plans. Yeah, go ahead and add any details if you're putting apps and stuff in that may be helpful to kind of help folks on how to assess money and ways to utilize that resource. And so I believe the link is still in the chat. It's also in the deck. As always, we'll send you these resources and they will be accessible to you. And this will be a space where we can support each other in our practice. And kind of want to close this out with two things, as always, inviting folks in to an upcoming opportunity in the next session, looking ahead to building savings. On June 9th from 10 to noon, we'll be back together again. These are some of the guiding questions and aspects of the standards in which we'll be addressing. And as always, want to invite anybody who feels like they're doing something, good or different or distinct or unique specific to this particular standard and how you approach it with your participants in the way you do your trainings, to maybe lean into sharing that with a larger agency by recording a video. The offer still stands as an incentive for folks to get a $50 gift card to spend within your economy locally. That will still stand. And as always, we'll continue to advance the practice of being a community of practice by having group leaders. So we'll send that information and those invites out as well, but just giving you the opportunity to see what's coming up, think about it, and inviting folks to maybe lean into putting together a video to share with the larger network some ways that it could look and we could potentially incorporate into our work. And last but not least, before we get out of here, want to post the link for the evaluation in the space so you can provide us feedback so that we can continue to adjust these and shift these in ways that serve your needs and the needs of the participants that you are working with. We appreciate your time and being here with us. Yeah, we look forward to seeing you on Thursday, June 10th. I think we might have had a typo there. Co-host, I think this says the 10th and then the last one it said the 9th. Can we confirm which of the two? Yeah.
Whichever one is Thursday. June 9th.
All right, June 9th. So the official day is June 9th. We just said 2, but it's the 9th, not the 10th, the 9th. We look forward to seeing you on the 9th. So we appreciate you. Please take time to fill out the eval and provide us that important feedback. We appreciate you and enjoy yourself, and we'll see you in other spaces soon.
Thank you.